Welcome to Real Smart, the real estate podcast you've been waiting for. I'm Spencer Kallick, a real estate and land use attorney at Matkins. On this show, I sit down with some of the most dynamic and accomplished voices in real estate to explore trends shaping the industry and uncover what truly sets great leaders apart. Hey everybody, today on Real Smart, we're joined by Mark Muenzer, Planning and Development Director, and also currently serving as the Interim Housing and Human Services Director for the beautiful city of Culver City here in California. He has decades of experience shaping how cities grow and evolve. Over the course of his career, Mark has worked at the center of some of the most important conversations cities face, from housing and development to infrastructure and long-term community planning. With leadership across multiple municipalities across the United States, Mark brings a unique perspective on how cities balance policy, growth, and the needs of the communities they serve. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, Spencer. How are you?
I'm great. I'm even better. I'm so honored that you're here with us in our Matkins office. We were saysaying, usually I get to come to City Hall, but today you got to come to me.
Exactly. Beautiful view, and happy to have this conversation.
Awesome. Well, Mark, I mean, I feel like I know you well, but for our listeners, for our viewers, tell me a bit about, back up a couple steps. What is the Mark Muenzer story? How did you get into the world of community development?
Wow, no one's ever asked me that before, but I'll do my best. I fell into it. I think like a lot of good careers, you had another path, and while you were taking that path, you discovered something else. And in my case, that was urban planning. So I did have a political science undergrad in college. Like everybody, they thought that I would probably go to law school. I did not go to law school. I actually had another career before the one I have right now.
What did you do before?
I was in sales and marketing.
Okay.
For a Fortune 100 company.
Wow, okay.
Right with my bachelor's.
I love it.
And my two big accounts were Ragu Foods in Rochester, New York, and Bacardi Rum in Miami, Florida. So it was a good combo. Yeah. So it was the packaging. It was literally the glass bottles, and I was the account manager.
A little different than housing in Culver City, huh?
Oh, yeah, absolutely different. But I always tell everybody that it was, you still have customers, you're public speaking, you're conveying, quickly trying to convey complex ideas. And so they did translate. Mm-hmm. But about 3 or 4 years into it, I thought, I need to do something else. I need to make a little bit of a difference in the world. And I was not aware of urban planning. This was the early days of the internet. And I stumbled upon it, and I had been transferred from the East Coast to Cincinnati, Ohio, which the University of Cincinnati happened to have a great master's in urban planning program. And bing, bang, boom, I was back in grad school.
Wow. Okay. And so what was your first job out of grad school, and how did you come to find yourself in beautiful Culver City?
Yeah, so I worked for Hamilton County, the county that surrounds the city of Cincinnati, and I immediately became a manager. I was a few days as a planner, but I quickly was like, I think I'll be good managing. And so I became the corridor services manager, and I worked with a lot of inner ring suburbs of Cincinnati, more disadvantaged communities that didn't have they surrounded the urban core, but they didn't have those resources and attractions. So did that for about 3 years, and then I relocated to Chicago, where my first community development director job was a tiny little place called Countryside.
Sure.
6,000 people by Midway Airport. Okay. I was the director, the planner, the planning commission liaison.
Were you sweeping the streets too, or what?
Pretty much was. So, and then quickly from there, went to the city of Chicago, where I worked for almost 8 years. And that's where I really got my chops in design and architecture, politics.
Well, there's a little politics in Chicago.
A little bit. So managed the city's planning commission.
Were you there, by the way, the infamous story where the airport runway got demolished overnight? You were there for that?
I was there. I had no involvement.
Of course you had no. I knew nothing about it, of course. If anyone's listening, Mark Muenzer had nothing to do with it.
I read about it that morning like the rest of the
And your jaw was on the ground, too. You're like, you wake up and you're like, this is going to be an interesting day we're about to have. But amazing.
Yeah, no, it was a fantastic place to work, and just to have the opportunity to work on, really large scale skyscrapers, literally, and architects, and working with Chicago has 50 city council members, so that's a process. Yes. And so really enjoyed my time there. ultimately ended up in the city of Evanston, just north of Chicago. As you're
my
well aware.
beloved Northwestern, my alma mater. Go Cats!
I was the director in Evanston, and so like obviously a lot to do with the Northwestern and town gown relations and managing that process in the land use and planning arena. You've heard this story before, but those are during the polar vortex winters.
I think I was there for those winters. It was brutal. Yeah.
And I was applying wax to my Labrador Retriever's paws one morning at 5:30 in the morning because it was so cold that even a Labrador Retriever couldn't be on the sidewalks of Chicago.
Oof.
And I thought I need to move to California. So I had looked before, and then the opportunities in the Bay Area came about. So I moved west.
And so first stop in California was the city of
Menlo Park, where the headquarters of Meta Facebook are. So a lot of work on those large projects. But a lot of infill development too. Menlo Park's got a really cool, maybe a little bit underperforming, not anymore, but at the time downtown. So working on that downtown plan.
And then you got a phone call, like an outstretched arm from on high that said, come on down to Culver City.
Well, there was a stop in between.
Okay.
There was a stop in between in Redwood City.
Okay.
But then after that, had always, been looking to Southern California and really wanted the right place. I had been to Culver City once. And I still remember the orange part of Ivy Station, and that was on the recruitment brochure. And I remember thinking, oh yeah, that Culver City, that seems like a cool spot. Yeah. And I started reading up on it, and the
rest is history. So for those people who don't know about Culver City is a really an amazing place. I'm biased, but it's a city right next to the city of LA.
Sure.
Has connectivity through multiple freeways, roads. The subway goes through Culver City, which is where Ivy Station's development is. Also has Sony Studios. It has now Amazon Studios. It has Apple West Coast campus. It's got a lot going on. But for your purposes, you kind of came to the city at a time where there was a lot of changes occurring. You had a new council, a very progressive council, very pro-housing. They were going through a housing element update. I mean, they were really focused on, okay, we've got all these jobs here now. How do we build a housing, and how do we make sure that people don't drive, 2 hours to get here, but actually create community? So what was it like when you showed up? What did you walk into?
I walked into what you just explained, but also the city had gone through a multi-year general plan process for, the audience. I think most of whom will know that the general plan is really the blueprint for the city, and it lays the groundwork for all the land use regulations and for the implementation of the zoning code. There had been a lot of COVID had been happening during this time. Just a lot of, how do we create this housing? How do we create a regulations and zoning code that are encourage it as much as possible in our transit-oriented areas, and we have to get this over the finish line. And so I came in, and with my help and with several of my team members' help, we got that general plan approved, and that really has led to a lot of really unprecedented residential mixed-use growth in the city. So it was the commercial boom had and is happening, and then there was certainly a push by the community and the city council to create as much housing as possible.
So in the city of California, not a secret that we have a housing crisis. Not a secret that the HCD and the state have really been cracking down on cities, requiring them to put together not just thinking about how do you build housing, but actually real plans, updating their housing elements. Culver City is unique, right? Lots of cities have put together these plans,
Sure.
and frankly, they've sat on the shelf, or maybe there's not as much political will to implement them. Whereas Culver City was kind of like flying the plane while you were building the plane, and has seen, like you said, I mean, I think in terms of projects I've worked on, is about 5,000 units of multifamily housing entitled in the last 12 months. But what makes Culver City unique in that regard? How did that happen all of a sudden?
Well, I mean, we have embraced our responsibility. I mean, I think that's the answer at the end of the day. Some other places, there's, been some hemming and hawing as to how are we going to accommodate this, and where are we going to put it, and how tall is it going to be? And those conversations are certainly happening and have happened in Culver City. But right from the beginning, it's been like, no, we'll figure this out, and we will get this done. And, we have a 5 square mile community, so, there's just not that much room, but we have made the space for it. And, we really have embraced these requirements. And it doesn't mean that it's always universally accepted or there's not debate about.
I've been yelled at plenty in your city. Don't worry.
That's, relatively rare. I mean, there's good public debate, but at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out a way how to get these projects built and not to, I often have these conversations with my teams that, we're there to be a facilitator. Yes, we have city codes and city regulations and city plans to enforce and that we have requirements for. We're not gatekeepers. We're there to facilitate development, appropriate development, to ask the right questions, and to prepare projects and plans and codes, ultimately for the city council's review that have been fully vetted. And that's what we do. And I think that was a little bit of a change when I came on board. And, I'm really happy that I believe, hopefully, by yourself and some others that have proposed development in the city, that's what we're doing.
I agree. You've been phenomenal. Your team, give Emily Stadnicki a shout out.
Emily Stadnicki, yes.
She gets a real shout out because you guys have been great. What is it do you think other cities can take away from Culver City's success? Because, what I see is some cities, frankly, put together plans and it just sits on the shelf, or they do it to make HCD happy, but they don't really intend to ever really make it possible for those developments to come together. And we're not naming names. We're just talking. We're just talking here. But what lessons can other cities, other leaders take from Culver City and maybe employ in their own cities?
Well, I mean, the worst thing, right? To have a plan sit on a shelf. Like, what a waste of the community's time and resources, financial resources and staff resources. Like, I'm a GSD guy for sure. Anybody who works with me knows that. My mind immediately goes to, okay, how do we get this done? When do we get it done? And what are the resources? Because, this matters. If we're talking about housing, have these conversations all the time too. These are real people and real families and generational change about people that could not live in our community before. And we're playing a big role in setting the table, if you will, for that to happen. So, and I also think there needs to be a really clear dialogue with the decision makers, with the city council, and as much as possible in those conversations to make sure that our marching orders are clear and that we are as quickly as possible communicating to the planning commission or to the city council, certainly to the community, any changes that we're proposing. You're out there early and you're out there often, and I'm a true believer in communicating in all of the ways. I look at some cities where, they're still going those traditional routes, and I don't think that expecting a person or a family to show up at City Hall or at Community Center at Wednesday night at 7 p.m. is the most effective way to get community input. It's a way to get it, but you need to do all the other things. You need to do social media. You need to do virtual open houses.
A podcast, perhaps.
A podcast to get the good word out. We do QR codes on the city sidewalks for all of our general plan and specific plans, like all of the ways. And also, too, like making sure the right people are doing the right work, and the inside baseball part of it, that you're hiring people that are committed to the work and believe in the work and want the best for Culver City. And, when we hire folks, those are part of the conversations. Like, why do you really want to be here? Because I want to be here because it's a housing forward thinking GSD place. And like that really, like across the board with all of my colleagues in different departments. I think that sometimes, maybe those conversations don't happen on the inside. And those are really important because at the end of the day, it's that team and it's that staff that's going to implement and come up with the recommendations for different long-term plans.
Do you have any siblings or any clones? Because I'd really love to clone you and put you in several other cities where I wish.
I'm not sure how much. I do have two siblings. I'm not sure how they would feel about the cloning part.
Fair enough. Are they in planning as well?
They're not.
Oh, okay.
They're
all
not.
right. Well, one day we'll figure out how to clone you and put you in other cities. So plans are important. Entitlements are important. How do we get housing built? What is missing and what roles can the city play in helping to take an entitled project from a piece of paper to people, moving in and living there?
Well, I mean, I don't have to tell you, like every project is different, and the financing behind every project and the property control and the how decisions are made. And, those are done outside of the scope of the city. But, to lead with what you started with, I mean, you have to have a general plan and a zoning code and specific plans that encourage that as much as possible. We are actually now, this is just now, we're rounding third, if you will, in Culver City. And we're all of these years of all of this planning work is starting to come to fruition. And we're having larger residential mixed-use projects start to come in for building permit and being reviewed. And we hope that construction, in some cases, construction has started on some major projects. And so from our side, when I arrived in Culver City, we were very paper and hard copy plan focused. And I and my team have spent the last 3.5 years changing that. So like,
no more of the big, huge rolls that you had to drag in.
Drives me crazy and just wasteful and not good, for the environment, all that good stuff. So, and the most important part is that if you and your team need to apply for a permit and submit plan check comments at 2 a.m, because that's what works for you, then you should be able to do that. So we have set up all of those systems, a complete online portal where all of that work is done and can be reviewed by staff, also remotely.
Staff's working at 2 a.m. also, I hope?
The staff is not working at 2 a.m. And I always thank you for interjecting that, Spencer. When they do come in, then they have, their queue set of things that maybe have come in overnight or over the course of the weekend, while at the same time, still doing the good old fashioned in-person counter work, because there's lots of people that really want to just come in and hash things through. So we have our beyond digital permits. Our counters are open from 7:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. We're just making it as easy as a permitting and plan review process can be. And we want to make sure that there's no impediment on the city side for you to at least begin the process. So
there are a lot of people who have similar jobs to you in other cities across Southern California and frankly across the United States who could walk in here and say the same thing. I will digress for a second and say that you actually mean what you say, and you not just talk about it, you walk the walk. And I know firsthand that, I've called you and said like, hey, here's an issue we're having, or here's a, challenge we're having. Can we think about some creative solutions that ultimately, you're still complying with all the city's rules and regulations.
Of course.
There's no favors being done, but like, let's get creative about how do we solve these problems and keep project moving forward so they can hit milestones. And that's really a credit to you and your leadership and your team to be able to think about that a little bit differently and be a problem solver as opposed to just saying no all the time. So you say no to me plenty.
I'm going to remind you of this when I do occasionally have to say no.
You do say no.
I was going to say, like, for the record,
but it's
here,
with a
I do
smile.
say no.
It's with a smile.
Well, always with a smile. I mean, at the end of the day, we want to be pleasant and make sure that we have good working relationships. I think that's a beauty of a Culver City, that we have the resources to implement the tools for the public to streamline application and review and permit issuance as much as possible. But, I don't refer to myself in the third person very often, but like you can also call the planning and development director and he's going to hopefully get back to you that day and say, I don't know the answer right now, but I'm going to talk to so-and-so and so-and-so, and I'm going to get back to you tomorrow. And, that's why another reason why I was driven to Culver City was because it had the large scale, impactful development and planning, but it was a city of presently 40,000 people where both internally and externally were able to react quickly. I was actually just called into a meeting this morning about a project that I won't go into detail about, but I found it's a very potentially impactful project in our downtown area, and I rearranged my schedule to make sure that I could be there because they wanted to talk to someone in my position, and I don't know if that necessarily happens everywhere.
So housing is one focus, and we've talked a lot about housing, but there are lots of other things going on in Culver City. I won't bring up anything too controversial, but what are the other kind of things on the horizon that kind of go hand in hand with housing that you're focused on from a development standpoint? What's maybe missing in the city? I know there's been a lot of discussion, for instance, about hotels or other things. And what are you all doing to help make that happen?
The two things that I would talk about immediately is right after, as you're aware, right after the general plan and zoning code were updated in late 2024, there were two neighborhoods that were immediately impacted by a lot of those development regulations. Our Fox Hills community, which saw a lot of large-scale development based on the parcel sizes and location, and the Hayden Tract area, which for those of you watching or listening is on the border with the city of Los Angeles. It's right by two transit stations, and the best thing about it is like they've got this cool, funky architecture that like makes it a place. And what was missing it has a lot of creative office, has a pretty healthy daytime population, but no one lived there. The city did not allow residences until late last year. I think we had maybe a couple weeks, like once the city council had finally approved the general plan, and we immediately started working on these two neighborhood plans because we saw the development that was being proposed and that was being approved, and we wanted to make sure that we made it as much of a neighborhood and pedestrian connections and right-of-way improvements where we can, open spaces, connections to other open spaces, that before the full-on development was happening, that the city was, again, on a more micro scale, laying the groundwork for what we hope is a really vibrant mixed-use neighborhood in both cases. So that immediately started to happen. We are presently looking at how to also encourage hotel development wherever we can in the city. We've recently approved a hotel, obviously with the major events coming to LA in the Olympics and Super Bowl and such, time is of the essence, but, by virtue of our location and the employers with Sony and Amazon Studios and Apple, that, we are a great destination, our vibrant downtown that people constantly visit. Like, we're a great place for a hotel. So let's look at how, again, to go back to my initial conversations, like, okay, so how can we make this as easy as possible while at the same time knowing that a commercial entity like a hotel is and should have a public review process. So that's some of it. That we're doing a lot of work in the mobility area in terms of, bus lanes and bike lanes. I'm presently, as you mentioned, the city's interim housing and human services director.
Lots of hats.
As my part-time job. And Culver City has been such a leader in services to the unhoused, from buying motels to house people that were formerly unhoused, to leasing other motels. We have a mobile crisis team that is out on the street every single day working with folks to make sure that, they find a place to go. And it's all part of this larger ecosystem, which we have been talking a lot with the community and city council as of late, that we are building a pathway for folks, hopefully, to stay in the community long term. It's certainly important to find housing and services today, right now, to meet needs. But we've also done the long-term work and starting to see the evolution, the actual construction of affordable housing units, the thousands of units that you mentioned. We also currently have, 650 affordable units that are coming online that will be available to people that, earn certain lower income levels. So it's all of those things coming together. And that also does not happen without strong community support and strong support from decision makers, the city council. And, they are so supportive of us. We work crazy hard. And we do a lot with a really lean staff.
I've seen it.
The amount of public appreciation that we get across the board is fantastic. It means a lot to me, but really means a lot to my teams.
I mean, you guys really are leaders. You all were nice enough to include me in a panel last year, or earlier this year, I guess, at the American Planning Association California meeting. Basically, all the planners, it was like nerd camp for planners. And you all did a session just on...
I would call it that too.
I love it. No, I'm a nerd. But you all did a session just on how you all put together these plans and incentivize housing. You had a packed room and standing room only. And a lot of these cities throughout the state are just clamoring to figure out what the special sauce is. How do you do it? And I think it's all the things that you just talked about that make it possible.
It's leadership. It's hard work. And, there's no getting around the hard, smart work We may have a question later about leadership, and I'm all about working smart. Somebody on my team that is like, oh, I worked 60 hours last week, like that should never, ever, ever happen. Like 40 hours is a big chunk of time, and working smart and using your skill set and using technology, we should be able to get those things done. And then just, I say this a lot, I don't seek out contentious situations, but I'm perfectly comfortable in them. Somebody has to be, it's the job of a leader to move conversations forward. And sometimes the moving forward isn't necessarily the recommendation or the opinion that I had, but we have a backlog of planning, development, and housing items to work on, and we have to start, moving things through a process.
So, cities get blamed a lot. People in your position get blamed a lot. I know, it's shocking. No, but you all get blamed a lot for
breaking news on this podcast.
Exactly, you heard it here first. But people get you all get blamed a lot for being kind of the squeaky wheel, the things that, not Culver City, but cities in general. What are some of the misconceptions that developers and their teams have about entitlements in a city? And what are some things that you wish that people realized early on that would make some of those misconceptions go away?
Yeah, I think that there's two sets of misconceptions. I mean, I think a big misconception sometimes, unfortunately, is that city staff or certain city staff just doesn't care, or they're just, phoning it in, or just, punching in and punching out. Does that exist? Yes, but it's very rare, and I would argue
not in the city of Culver City.
Well, and I would argue that it exists in any organization. Sure. That's not my experience. It actually has not been my experience in any city or certainly any department that I've worked for. So I think some of that has gone away in time as governments have, largely, not all, but have largely become more responsive and forward-facing in the use of technology and such. So I think some of that is going away. So I think that that's a misconception. But I think there's, the misconception of maybe of a developer or a project applicant who thinks that the city is going to respond too much or not approve a project based on public input. And then I think that sometimes there's a perception on the public that we're going to, cave to a development project. And the misconception is, this, Spencer, by the time a project, particularly a commercial project, but even a residential project in these streamlined times that we live in, there's been hundreds of conversations and emails and preliminary reviews and double checks. And it doesn't mean that we get it right 100% of the time, but we pretty damn close. And the misconception is that like a project was proposed yesterday and now we're like, hey, approve it. And that's not the case at all. And
years and years
so
of time.
many people working in the background and asking questions and, meeting on site and meeting over Zoom and meeting in City Hall. In Culver City, we currently have about 80 different development projects, residential and commercial development projects under review right now in some form or fashion. And all of that is presently done. I believe we're at 6 or 7 planners,
wow.
And current planners. So that work is just divided amongst those folks. And so I think the misconception is like threefold, is like how hard city staff works. And then on either side of the development equation, depending on which side you're on. Our job is just to make sure that we are as objective as possible, that we have findings, in zoning codes that we need to make, and we have other requirements that we have to make. And then we also have to, to go back to like, we also don't have all day, okay, chop, we have time frames. Some of them are required by the state and some of them are just internal to move projects through the process. So
you raised a really good point, which is, I think there's a misconception that you all can do whatever you want, and that it's really, and you all have a tremendous amount of discretion, but I think you're right. A lot of these new state laws have put very clear boundaries around what cities can do. Frankly, I think for a lot of cities that are not called Culver City, but Culver City is lumped in with all of them. But you've been, I think, good and proactively messaging and talking to your community and stakeholders about that, and then being clear, like, this is not an option that I have, right? This is not something. So, I'm sorry that you don't like it. You can yell at Sacramento, but this is something that we as a city are legally obligated to do. And we're just doing our jobs.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes a big difference.
That's been the biggest change in my job and the purview that my departments have had, has been the changes coming out of Sacramento and the quote unquote loss of local control over particularly residential land use decisions. And that is a fact. Every legislative session that happens, again, a place like Culver City that, largely, and has really welcomed housing and has done everything that it can, maybe not as big of a conflict. Educating the public and trying to inform the public of what our role is now, which is much more limited.
It's
in
complicated
a variety
too.
Of different ways.
It's really hard to explain.
It's crazy complicated. I'm glad you brought that up. On Monday evening, we presented to the Culver City Council a plan for SB 79. And I think a lot of people know, but SB 79 is I think it's abundant housing near transit legislation that was passed by the state of California that effectively upzones areas within certain distance of a transit station. So it allows
which is most of the city of Culver City, because you have a lot of transit. Yeah.
It is crazy complicated, that piece of legislation. Its intent, I think that, Culver City was a supporter of that legislation, but it's the rollout of it. So it's the combination of informing the public of, okay, so our role previously in terms of approving or denying is not the same. So we have to make that education. But at the same time, our staff have now spent hundreds of hours on SB 79, and that was on no work plan last year. It goes into effect July 1st. It is what it is. But, to your initial point, I don't know how popular this will be, so we'll see. Like the part of the lobbying and the conversations that are happening in Sacramento and elsewhere as housing legislation is being debated, like that's obviously the time for changes and yay or nay. Once it goes into effect, and my team knows this, I'm like, okay, well, like that's it. Like that, we can bemoan it, or we can be excited about it, but like it is what it is. When is the effective date? And we're going to work back from there. And what are our options? So like, when we had the conversation with City Council on Monday night, we were ready. We're like, we can do this option this is super complicated. We didn't plan for it, but we're going to make time for it. We'll get it in place by July 1. And then we have this longer term thing that will, be part of a larger planning process. So, I think the biggest lesson is just get to work. Like once the governor signs it and you have a date, you've got your marching orders, get to it.
Tell me a little bit about your leadership style. I mean, I've seen it in practice. You've talked a little bit about it.
I think you just saw a little bit of it. But.
No, I like it. But, you deal with so many different stakeholders. You get yelled at probably more than I do. You've got your own internal staff. You've got, a new city manager. You've got new department heads. You've got, relatively new city, all these new state laws. Like, what is your leadership style, and how have you had to kind of adjust it in Culver City?
I mean, I think any leader, director will tell you, a good one, that you're adjusting always. My leadership style from people that directly report to me adjusts depending on that person and what their work plans are and what their skill sets are and past experience. So I'm constantly adjusting with the goal of making them as successful as possible. Nothing makes me happier than for me not to be involved in X conversation because Emily or Troy or Tim, who are all division manager in Culver City, that's gone through and they and their teams have effectively and quickly handled and moved it on through. Nothing their success. Nothing makes me happier than that. And that is ultimately my job.
Were you about to say their success is our success?
No, I was going to say, I just want their success. And then the other thing though, too, is like what I said before, there's also times, and anybody throughout the course of my career, I think that have worked with me, I just, you have to be comfortable saying, okay, the time for deliberation and debate is done. Mm-hmm. And here's the decision. And I hope everybody's comfortable with it. And now we got to talk about a timeline to move forward. And I also am the opposite of a micromanager. We have hired you because you're capable and you've got great experience, and get to it. and I, whatever you need in terms of city resources, staff, technology, my support at conversations at a higher level, like you have that, and you just message me on my phone. And there's never a day that I don't get multiple messages from my team members saying, hey, I need 5 minutes. And like a good leader does that. Like you make 5 minutes. And if I can't make 5 minutes, it's, hey, I'm doing this podcast. And as soon as I'm out on my way home, I'm going to call you and we'll figure it out. And it's so easy to be like, oh, you figure it out. And sometimes that has to happen, but most of the time it's like, no, let's just, so long as it's quick and we get to the point and that we have a decision, that's the most important part. The other thing I think about a good leader, have a sense of humor. My goodness gracious. Like
you got to have fun. That's why I always say to clients, if you're not having fun, why are we doing this? Right?
Absolutely. Like you're doing the good work. Like you got into this profession, public sector, urban planning, building, code enforcement, like you got in it probably for the right reasons, but it's hard work. It can be contentious. As you said, you sometimes get yelled at. And like, just, you can internally, appropriately, like just laugh and, life's too short.
Amen.
Life's
Amen.
too short. So.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about AI. I know it's very cliche to ask that, but is AI going to take over? Like, are we not going to have a planning department anymore? Is it going to be all AI bots? Or what role do you think AI has in the planning process?
We have just adopted an AI policy. The Planning and Development Department is going to be one of the first city departments to do a pilot rollout. And I'm not going to go into the details of what it is, but we're starting very, very small, but with a subset of projects and reports that are under the purview of the department. And then we're gonna do what I think maybe we're behind a little bit with the private sector, but what I'm hearing from other governments, we're gonna run parallel paths. So we're gonna have the planner take it through the process at the same time as the AI mechanism. And then we're going to do a compare and contrast. But our policy at the end of the day is that there's always going to be a staff person that's going to be reviewing the work that is created. So, we have a responsibility to use city resources as effectively as possible. We're looking at it in other areas of the city. And so to me, AI is that. And it's a conversation that's starting to happen, and we can take our time with it. But I think a lot of governments fell behind early with an online world and the internet, and it took them a long time, Culver City included, to recover.
The train has left the station.
I don't want to see us miss this opportunity. Mm-hmm. Starting slow, starting small, but yeah, I think it'll play a role.
So you're obviously very experienced, been doing this for a long time. If you're a young person out there, if you're someone thinking about going to planning school, what would your recommendation be for them right now? What would your advice be to folks wanting to get into this business?
Can I say, first of all, general advice for what this career, and I think you would probably agree with me, Spencer, like make sure it interests you greatly and that you love it as much as you can, a profession. This is a lot of time. A lot of effort, and it's going to take you away from other things in your life that you love and that you want to dedicate time to. So for something to do that, make sure it's not just a job. Make sure that it's not 100% based on compensation. Clearly that's a factor, but like really take some time with it. And I think it's crazy that at 18 years old, I was off to college and they're like, pick a major, and I was political science, and like I did not have the life experience or the direction to make that decision. And I was able to, later on in my 20s. So like really pick something that really interests you. And you know what? If it's a second or third choice, so be it. You're going to be very happy that you made that choice. But if you're choosing government and the public sector, I think the biggest thing that I would tell people is like do it for the meaning of the work and for the intent of the work. And that, all these cities that I work for, when I go back to them and I see the affordable housing building that's been built, partly because of the role I played in it, the park, the regular apartment building, the commercial center, you know, like all of those things happen because I and a lot of other people played a role in that. And like that is super meaningful. And you have to be in it for the long game because like this ain't happening.
These projects take a long time.
Right?
Even in a place like Culver City where it's very friendly, it still takes a long time.
Yeah, but I still get like in Culver City, like we're talking about some groundbreakings right now. I just went to one last Friday for an affordable housing project. And that's like, I still get super excited about it because I know all of the effort, community, staff, elected officials that went into it. And like, look, like we're actually digging into the ground and people are going to be living here. And I think about that a lot. So when people are thinking about, you know, government, the other thing is too, is like, you know, with the meaning and with the intent, it's probably never going to compete solely on compensation. So like, that's why you have to balance it with that.
Amen. Mark, this has been phenomenal. I really, really, really appreciate you taking the time. This has been a treat for me. Thank you for taking the time. Thanks to listeners for listening. And all I can say is do more work in Culver City. I'm obviously biased, but it's a great city, and Mark and his team are phenomenal. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it. Thanks. The content of this podcast is for the general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship between you, the host, guest, or Alan Matkins. You should not act or rely on any information discussed without first consulting a qualified attorney regarding your specific situation. Any opinions expressed are those of the individual speaking and do not necessarily reflect the views of Alan Matkins or its clients.